Alison, I'm very excited to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much for taking the time to show up with us today. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited. I'm anxiety, anxious and excited at the same
Excited.
Oh,
time.
I like that phrase. Anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fine line.
Yeah.
Well, we're very. I'm very excited. I'm going to speak for you.
I'm excited too.
Okay.
I'm a little anxiety. I always have a little bit of anxiety
With
before
these
these things, which I think
conversations.
just the right level is probably good for these sorts of
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
So let's start then, because why not? And I'd like to ask if you were to describe yourself to a stranger, someone who's never met you, about who is Alison Coward, what might you begin to sort of say to them about who you are at this moment in your life?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to my head is how I usually introduce myself as like the founder of a team culture consultancy. But of course, I'm so much more than that, aren't I? I am a mum to two cats who I love dearly. I'm a Londoner. I'm a daughter. I'm a big sister. I am. Gosh, can you give me another another prompt? It's really hard to answer that.
Yeah. Okay, I'll ask you another prompt. And this is something that we do in our music night gatherings, and it might be too off the wall. So if it's too off the wall, you let me know. And we've not done it on here before. If you were to describe yourself at the moment as a body of water, and it could be anything from a glacier to a subterranean, deep, dark, cold stream to a storm, or the steam of a kettle boiling, it could be anything. How would you describe yourself as a body of water right now?
Without a doubt, yeah. I mean, that's the first thing that came into my mind. I feel like there's a sense of yeah, like trying to find balance. So I'm kind of seeing the wave, but the surfer on the wave. So trying to find balance and trying to I wouldn't say command control. Trying to get to a level where things are kind of stable, but knowing that takes a lot of negotiating and a lot of focus and concentration, but also a sense of like kind of riding with it.
Oh, I love that. That was
worked
very
really well.
yeah.
Thank
That's
you.
a very descriptive, vital image.
Yeah, it's nice to get a sense of you outside that kind of usual narrative. So a wave, and now I'm going to give you the opportunity for a little bit of a narrative, but kind of going for what I frame as a formative experience. And I wonder if you could tell us maybe about a shaping formative experience that brought you to where you are today. And that could be the kind of work that you do, the fact that we're having this conversation. You kind of look like you've recognized something already, so I'm gonna hand it over to you.
I mean, I think there's so much, but the first thing that comes to my mind, and I feel that this has it hasn't defined my whole life, but it's definitely defined a lot of my outlook on life. But I fell ill in 2016. I had I didn't know it at the time, but I had an autoimmune flare. And I got diagnosed with an autoimmune condition. And I think the lead up to it, I was feeling sort of not myself for quite a while, definitely in the year before, sort of having lots of symptoms. And as usual with sort of autoimmune conditions, you're going to the doctor, they can't really find anything. They put it down to sort of a lot of other different things and can't really find anything in tests, that kind of thing, which is a bit frustrating. But then I finally got very, very ill at the beginning of 2016 and progressively worse, to the point where sort of the doctor was kind of getting me to come back every week to see if I was okay. And I remember I sort of had this blood test. Finally, all the doctors couldn't figure out what was going on. And one doctor looked at me and said, "Oh, you need to test for this." And I had this blood test, and literally she was like, "That's the thing. You need to go into hospital now." And I spent a week in hospital, sort of with the doctors trying to figure out what was going on. And I think sort of being, I don't know, in the lead up to that, I kind of felt quite helpless because there weren't these answers as to what was wrong with me, and I didn't know what I needed to do to get onto the other side and to get well again. At the same time, it was quite bizarre because I kind of also knew that when I did get to the other side of it, it would be quite a formative experience. Anyway, in hospital, doctors come in, sort of gradually starting to figure out what was wrong with me, or what it was that I was experiencing. And I think, you know, sitting in the hospital bed, there was sort of one thought, and it was like, I don't want to, like, I don't like being in hospital. I mean, obviously, I run my own business. There's lots of things going on, and felt quite, everything felt quite out of control. But I remember sort of sitting there in the bed thinking, right, I'm going to do whatever I need to do to not get back into this bed. Like, I don't want to have this experience of being in hospital again for this thing. So I remember sort of coming out of hospital and just, I mean, I was there for a week, but I think the minute I came out, I started researching the condition that the doctors had diagnosed me with, and just trying to find stories of people that had it. It was quite scary at first, because the autoimmune condition that I was diagnosed with, and there's a reason I say was diagnosed with rather than I have. So the autoimmune condition that I was diagnosed with is actually quite rare. And there wasn't that much about it. And actually, there was some very scary kind of prognosis as well. You know, I hadn't really seen any examples of people that had come through on the other side. But then I did come across some research around sort of, you know, lifestyle and diet, and just started on my own sort of road to recovery. I remember sort of having some very sort of tricky conversations with doctors, that were telling me that I needed to take this medication for the rest of my life and this, and I was just didn't really like the idea of it. Of course, I understand the value of medication for, you know, acute situations, but I was kind of thinking, I'm sure like a lot of the stuff was like immunosuppressants, and I was like, I'm sure that we need our immune system. I don't quite want to suppress it for the rest of my life. So I just kind of started on my own journey of sort of discovering how I could get well myself. And I guess sort of, you know, started on that journey. As of 2020, I was off all medication. Actually saw one of the specialists last week. And she was, you know, she just continues to be kind of quite surprised by how I've recovered. And her words were, you know, people that are diagnosed with this usually have a very tricky course. So I'm really pleased that you've kind of, you know, recovered and continue to recover in this way. So I think there were so many things around that, not just in terms of the physical health, but in terms of the emotional and mental side of it, in terms of being determined to get well, and also what that taught me about, I guess, how I was before I got diagnosed, and what I wasn't prepared to go back to.
Do you want to?
I was just going to say, it sounds like it was a clarifying moment for you, that before and after going through that.
Sorry, say that again.
It just sounds like that was very clarifying for you to go through that process, and it kind of made you identify. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I'm curious about the determination piece. I mean, I've known you for a long time, I'm glad to say, and I've always experienced you as very determined and clear-sighted, and you really go for things. Kind of not so much in a sort of semi-focused way, like you include your relationships. You know, some people who kind of just go, right, I'm just going to go with this. But you have this determination to you. And I'm curious about when you made that choice to do whatever was within your power to not end up back in that bed for that reason again. What helped you to make those steps? Because anyone who's had any kind of quite significant diagnosis will know that it can be quite a thorny and painful road to recovery. There's all sorts of emotional responses, you know, we can tailspin very easily when we're met with painful news that's unexpected. What helped you to get that resolve and move forward?
You know, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting you say that about being determined, because I was telling another friend about this experience I hadn't seen for a while, and she just said to me, like, that's just such an Alison response. And I kind of thought, I don't know what I really don't know what that means, but I guess like people around me don't seem to be surprised that that's the route that I took, whereas I felt that I learned a lot from it. And I think, with this specific situation as well, I think, it's really important that luck does come into this kind of stuff as well. I don't think that it's possible to deal with all health issues in this way. There are so many different factors. I think in this particular situation, I was relatively lucky because, one, I had access to information. Two, I think that the information out there was quite developed at the time as well. Like, I was able, if this had happened 10 years ago, I think it would be a very different story for me. Actually, it was, well, I guess probably I say 15 years ago, because it's coming up to sort of 7 years now anyway. I think I don't know, I'm very independent. I think I'm very independent, and I don't like to a fault, having to rely on things or people around me to get to do what I want to do. And I think being, I wouldn't say being at the whim of, but being directed by, I guess, people outside of me, like the special. I mean, people are experts, right? They know this symptom. They've seen this condition more than I have in my life. At the same time, I've seen me more than anybody else has seen seen me than anybody else has seen me in their life. So, I wanted to sort of take as much control over it as much as I knew about myself, because seeing a specialist every month is not the same as living with myself for, every single minute of every single day. And I didn't want to leave like my future up to someone that I was going to see for an hour every month. I'm sure for me, I was sure there was more stuff that I could be doing. And I also just had this image of myself as well, of just being well again. And it really kept me going. I keep on sort of going back to this image of me. I mean, the condition that I had affected my muscles. So it was really sort of quite a struggle to move around. And I just had this image of me like jumping on the beach. And that was like something that, I just wanted to get to that point where I felt like I had that energy again.
You said something really interesting there about your friend. That's a really Alison response.
Yeah.
And actually, it's part of our getting to know you questions. And that is, what do you think are the main differences between how people perceive you and how you perceive yourself? So when someone says that's a real Alison response, does that feel that meets your internal image of yourself? Is it, do you think that people have a different idea than what's going on inside? Or are they getting it right?
I mean, I think that's the case with everyone. I mean, I think externally people only see a snapshot. So I think what people see of me are, when I've made decisions, they hear the decision rather than the stuff that's gone on in my head to make that decision. And I've got a very, I guess, good way of sounding clear. Sounding like I wouldn't say sure of myself, but I think because I've gone through so much, that I think a lot. I'm a very heady person. So by the time I say something, I've often thought a lot about it anyway. So the end kind of result sounds like a lot of clarity. I think, I guess I am. That also means that I'm quite thoughtful. And I'm not saying that in a way to, compliment myself, but I think about things a lot, and I think about the impact of things. The Alison response, I guess what my friend was relating to was, I guess sort of my tendency to create clear plans around anything. Like if I've decided that I want something, then I do, I guess, strategize and think about it a lot. And for the most part, I do take action.
Yeah.
If it's something that I know that I want.
So it sounds like people might see the results of the action, but not necessarily all the machinations that are going on before that action happens.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, okay.
And what's one of the most surprising things or unexpected things about either that period or a different period that that have kind of led you to where you are now in your career and in your life?
Most surprising thing. I don't know if it's surprising, but I think it's a realization of the fact that I am, you are, everyone is always going to be trying to figure things out. And I think, you look at people and you think they've got it all sorted. And I guess this is, relating back to my friends saying, oh, that's such an Alison response, seeing the decision or the result of the actions. I guess it's an uncomfortable place to be, but there's always learning to do. I don't think, personally, I don't feel as old as I get that I'll ever get to a point where I'm like, this is it now. Because the minute I do feel that, then I'm on to the next thing. And that's frustrating about me, because I guess in the figuring out, what I'm trying to figure out is getting to a place of stability or certainty. But then knowing when I get to that place of stability or certainty, I'm quickly trying to find the next thing that I need to figure out. And I guess what's surprising about that is that I thought that when I got to a place of stability and certainty, I would stop.
Right, and then it just happens all over again in some.
It happens all over again, yeah.
I wonder if you could expand a little bit more about what you discovered in this clarification process, let's call it, with your illness. That sounds like that. Well, kind of two things seem to have happened. You were starting to indicate, as far as I understood it, right, that you're a really busy woman, right, and then this thing happens that kind of gets in the way of you being able to be busy, which probably meant that you had to let go of stuff that was previously unlet goable and all that kind of stuff. And then that becomes a focus, right? And then you come on the other side and then you realize, I don't want to do that before stuff anymore. So could you say something about what the before stuff is that you identified you didn't want to return to? And I'm also curious about whether you think you would have come to that realization had you not had an illness, or whether it would have taken longer, whether you kind of had some indications of it before but hadn't quite recognized it. Just fill us in some of those details if you could.
I think one of the biggest things, as I mentioned, I'm quite a heady person, so I live in my head quite a lot. So I think that a lot of the feeling into my body and like listening to my body was just not there before. I was really surprised by once I'd got out of hospital and sort of being forced to slow down, I was really surprised by the level of anxiety that lived in my body before. And I think I had just accepted that level of anxiety as just the state, how things were. And I guess realising that was, that energy, that sort of heightened energy all the time just wasn't sustainable. And, if I'm honest, it probably led in some part to me falling ill.
So it's almost like an ignorance of what was going on, like below the neck, in a sense.
Exactly. Yeah. I think someone laughed at me when I remember where I described this, but I was like, I think I was like I was just a walking head. Yeah.
I can relate to that.
It's true. It's such a good imagery for, like head forward, and everything else is just like to get the head around.
Yeah.
So funny. And it's not funny, but it's like, it's funny.
Well, it resonates, doesn't it? It resonates. Yes. And I think, I'm still guilty of that. I am still guilty of that, but I think I'm definitely much more aware of my body and realising all the pieces that needed to come together to, I guess, see, create a more healthy image of what success looks like for me. I guess it forced me to be a bit more rounded in what I was, I guess, figuring out. Yeah, I guess sort of a lot more rounded, and I think sort of more things. I think more things matter. You know, I mean, like now, for example, this pops into. I don't even know if it's relevant. We'll see where it goes. But you know, one of the things that I chose to do was completely change my diet. I think, you know, for me, I think that's been sort of the biggest factor in me, I guess, recovering and getting to a place where I felt that I could stop the medication that had been prescribed, which was sort of immunosuppressants and steroids. And when that happened, when I decided to transition to a different diet, I mean, it's really hard. Like any kind of change is difficult. I did it really gradually. I cut things out. I you know, started eating some more things. Every time I went to the supermarket, I'd, you know, pick something up and I'd look at the label. And I had a list with me all the things that I could have and I couldn't have. And it meant that I had to start cooking more or less everything from scratch. Now that's just how I do things. And, you know, I realise it is a bit of a pain when I'm busy, like cooking things from scratch. But at the same time, it's a realisation that is a promise that I'm keeping to myself. And seeing that path, you know, I eat mostly according to the paleo diet, and that's been since really the end of 2016. We're at, you know, 2023 now. I've also stopped drinking alcohol, and since that time, and when I look back on those things, it's like, you know, I did all of that for me to get healthy, and there's something in that kind of gives me, I guess, a bit of faith in myself, in a sense.
It's interesting that also you said that the kind of, because that's coming back to this idea of like what people see on the outside is the decision and change. And especially, you know, I hadn't seen you since before the pandemic, because a lot of people haven't seen it, and I don't live in the UK anymore. And so it's very easy to get snapshots of people's lives and be like, look at Alison, isn't she doing this amazing thing? You know, on paper, you look at the bullet points. And I think one of the things that really strikes me about what you've just described is the fact that it sounds to me from the outside in, were compassionate with yourself and did it step by step. It wasn't suddenly an overnight thing of now everything changes and I'm going to completely sort out my diet. It was a kind way to make really quite significant change that you were then able to integrate into your life, and like that you were able to keep your promise to yourself. And there's something quite, I don't know, tender from my perspective, looking at that journey of how you accompanied yourself into a different lifestyle, that if you look at the before and after, let's say, without that gradual progress, are quite distinct pictures.
You know what's interesting as you say that? This might be taking it in a slightly different direction, but I think also, and this has come to my mind, but you saying it has really grounded this for me, this has also changed. This has also had an impact on how now at Bracket we work with clients. Because before, I mean, this is how, you know me, Natalie, which is a workshop facilitator, going in and facilitating these workshops, and they're, you know, kind of one-off, like impactful, but one-off events. And over time, I mean, I don't know if it was 2016, maybe it was before that, but I had this kind of vision to transition more into sort of working with teams over a period of time, to do sort of, you know, team culture transformation. I mean, the interest has always been collaboration, and I've always been very passionate about bringing people together. But somewhere along the journey, I decided, you know what, I actually want to work with teams over a longer period of time. And I've just written a book, and it's a book called Workshop Culture, but I have this 5-pillar framework, and the final pillar of the framework is change. And the principle behind it is that you want to make these small changes over a period of time. You want to keep coming back to it. So I guess in being more compassionate with myself and realizing that, and actually going through that process of transformation for myself, I've understood much more about the process of behavior change and how we adopt habits for the long term and adopt lifestyle changes for the long term. And it was, I had to, when I was changing my diet, I dropped things out one by one gradually until the point now, 6 years later, I didn't even have to think about it. It's completely fully integrated into my life.
Yeah.
And I think, I know now, regardless of, where you're doing it, why you're doing it, and for what reason, if you want sustainable change to happen, that's largely how change happens. Like, we can be forced into it from a drastic event like my illness. I don't know whether I would have transitioned to the paleo diet if it wasn't for the fact that I felt ill, because there wasn't really any need for me to do it. It didn't feel like there was any need. I kind of felt that I ate healthy, I was relatively active. I didn't feel that I needed to do anything like that from a health point of view, but there was other things going on, probably from a emotional, mental, lifestyle, not being compassionate with myself point of view, where that change became necessary. And through those gradual changes, I've got to a stage where, I achieved a goal of being well and not identifying with this illness. Like, that's what I say. I'd like to say that I was diagnosed with, because for me, it feels like a past version of me rather than who I am now. And I think it's really important for me in my journey not to identify as someone who has that condition, but someone who was diagnosed with it.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely want to put a pin in that one, because I think identifying with conditions in certain categories can be really limiting, and I think it comes up a lot in these interviews. But the frame that you're offering here, well, again, I always draw on the psychological frame for it, is really interesting. I want to dig into a little bit. So I would say there's probably it's probably more than that, but basically two different motivators for change, right? So one of them is super egoic, which is the you must change, right? And the other one is this more gentle one that I think you're referring to, a self-advocacy change. That often people who are into the super ego, which is always the finger waggy, you're not good enough, catch up, be at war with your body. Yeah.
But that was me. I think that was me before.
That's what I'm wondering about, because it sounds like that anxiety-filled walking ahead was a lot about musts and shoulds, and often people, when they change their diets, it's super egoic. Yeah. They're at war with their bodies. They don't like their bodies. It's all about restriction and sacrifice, and then they fail, right? And there's some research that shows something like 9 out of 10 people who are diagnosed with a chronic heart condition find it difficult to change the habits that are contributing to that condition. And in fact, there's a book that we'll talk about later, and it's interesting that you had an autoimmune issue, because the book is called Immunity to Change, and it's about how when we want to change, it's almost like an immune system response that mitigates against it. So
interesting. Yeah,
it's great. We'll put it in the show notes. It's Leahy and Keegan, Immunity to Change, and they actually have a process of how you can identify what contradicts your desire to change, and what
I think I need to read that.
It's fat book, full of highly researched, really good, but it's a real commitment. But I guess what I'm saying is, so maybe you could say something from your personal experience, which then informed your work, that you moved from a super egoic motivation, you must, deadline, do, to self-advocacy, which stuck, right? So you managed to make that transition. And I wonder, and I'm sure there's still the super ego stuff, because obviously,
of course,
yes, that doesn't go away.
We can't escape that so easily.
But maybe could you say something about how those different voices feel and sound, right? Because you can kind of tell when you're being pushed or shoved or being advocated for within yourself.
That's such a good question.
Yeah. Oof. You know what's? I think it's a really difficult question to answer, because I can see both sides of those, and I think it's very easy to kind of flip between each of those sides without even recognizing it. So I guess I guess this might be a little bit embarrassing to say, but I think I had an experience a couple of weeks ago where we were having this conversation before we kind of officially started recording, which was like, it feels like, September, people have kind of woken up and things are kind of kicking into gear. I think before that I was feeling a slight frustration with things not perhaps moving in the way that I was hoping them to. Things felt like a little bit stuck. Things felt like they were moving a little bit too slow. And it was a Saturday, and I think it was the afternoon, and I decided to take a nap. And as I was taking the nap, I kind of said to myself, well, you're frustrated with the fact that things are not moving, but you're taking a nap. Like, well, which is it? What do you want to like give yourself time to relax, or do you want to get up and make things happen? And so I think, there's both the compassion for myself. I needed a nap and I deserve a nap because I work really hard. And then the other, which was, why are you taking a nap? Because you're not getting the things done that you want to get done. So I think sometimes
really
those two voices
that.
can exist at the same time. It looks like you kind of recognise that as well. I don't know.
Did you take your nap, or did you? What happened?
I took a nap with the resolve that once I got up, I was going to go for it. So it was like, okay, you take a 20-minute nap, and then once you get up, then you're straight into it.
Mm-hmm.
Good negotiation there.
I think those internal conversations are so important. And to recognize that we're divided and conflicted, and you have to come to some kind of agreement inside, right?
Yeah.
It's tricky though. It's funny because one of the things I find myself, and I'm giggling as you're talking about that, because it's like you tune into these different channels of conversation all happening at the same time, but at different levels, sort of, if you like a radio station maybe. And one of the things I often think is, especially if I want to rest, because I find it really hard to rest. And someone said this to me the other day in not so many words, but I've heard it from various different folks, which is, this capitalist system just wants you to be productive, and is that all you are as a human? And one of the most radical things you can do to kind of like do that to the system is to rest. And that somehow appeals to a part of me that's quite like the fighter part. Oh, that's good.
My friend bought
Rest is Resistance.
For those of you that are listening, could you hold it up again? Because some people just be listening. Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hershey. Free yourself from grind culture and reclaim your life.
That looks amazing.
Yeah, I'm definitely the best person in this room for resting. Napping is my favorite thing to do, and I'm absolutely happy to do it in every opportunity.
There's something in framing it so that the superego gets off your back. Because like, as long as my superego's got something to kind of like get its teeth into or to fight, then somehow that kind of quality of feeling gets it off my back. It's like, well, if I'm resting because fuck the system, I love, making a good living and the rest of it. So it's not like, it's not an either. But when it becomes sort of self-detrimental and you need to find a pathway to better well-being, then it's nice to kind of have these tricks up your sleeve.
Well, I think knowing what to listen to, and I'm curious because you work in workshops, right? So often with groups, right, they are just multi-person representations of the internal world, right? So you'll have the superego member of the group, you'll have the compassionate person, you'll have the person that wants to rest a little bit too much, and the other one, so maybe you could say something about what you've learned about that.
Yeah,
that is mirroring.
That is what I love about the work that I do, is that every situation that I walk into, it's going to be like a multitude of personalities and characteristics and ways of seeing the world. And I guess I see my role as a facilitator is, I want to help that group make progress, but part of making progress is helping them to understand each other and understand each other's perspectives. There's a group that I'm working with at the moment, and it's so interesting that they are, it's almost like there's a continuum of sort of perspectives on this particular situation. And having spoken to all of them individually, they're all amazing, and they're all right and they're all wrong at the same time. And I mean, I love that complexity, and I guess as I'm sort of speaking to you and listening to you, I guess that's something that I love about those voices that happen, those conversations that I have with myself as well. It is about understanding all of those perspectives and kind of negotiating and finding a way for those perspectives to coexist, because they will exist. Like, I'm not really going to find a way for one to overpower the other. Unless I go back to a way that's kind of unsustainable. You know, that super ego does drive me forward, but then I got ill. That kind of desire to rest does give me the kind of, I guess, the compassion for myself. But then there will always be something in me that wants to achieve and do things, because that's just in my nature. And so I'm always going to be negotiating those two parts of myself.
It's interesting.
And I guess the self-advocacy is the self-care is the newer part of myself.
I was just going to say, there's a really interesting writer called Jeremy Lent. Jeremy Mann's the artist. I've been too deep in the world of artists. Anyway, Jeremy Lent, who wrote a book called Webs of Meaning, and he talks about it as a democracy of consciousness, or a democracy of selves, in the sense that when you're talking about the group work, and each individual almost kind of almost occupies a different archetypal role somehow. And you see this in family constellations and things like this, but that we have a democracy of selves, and sometimes it's the two key voices that allow this. Sometimes you can bring in these other little voices and turn them up, that mean that you're in this constant dialogue or conversation, depending on how many parts are active in the moment, to figure out how to move forward. It's really curious. What are some of the ways in which...
That's facilitation. It is like bringing all of those voices together and trying to help them move forward. When people bring me or Bracket or one of our associates in, they're often stuck. It's almost like what's that? Where everyone's stuck. No one wants to make the first move, and everyone wants to make the first move. And so, you're there to bring all of those voices up and to help people see that actually that's the challenge, but also that's the richness of the group as well. Like, you don't want to lose those perspectives, because then it wouldn't make your group your group. And I guess it's the same with us as our, the different perspectives that we have. We don't want to lose or kind of overpower too much any part of ourselves, because that combination of all of those different perspectives is what makes us unique.
Have you ever heard of the organizational physics model? I learned about that recently. I can't go into the detail, I don't know by heart, but there was a really great metaphor, which was something like, if you're getting a team to take a rowboat across the river, right? There's someone who wants to get in and just start rowing and get over there. There's the person, there's the person who's like, well, have we packed lunch? Are there life vests in there? Is there a dock on the other side for us? There's the other one that's saying, well, maybe if we put in a sail, we could get there faster. There's the other person who wants to get everybody to row on time. And it's just this great kind of model, because like as soon as you read it, you know who you are and you know who those people are, right?
Yeah.
And you were saying, that's facilitation. And I wonder, and this is like a big ask of you, and I'm sorry, but we got limited time and I'm really curious. But like, as a facilitator, what do you think is one of the most important pieces in getting those different roles to actually hear each other? Because it's not just about hearing each other, but they lose patience with each other really soon, right? Like, the innovators lose patience with the people who want to move too fast, and the organizers lose patience with the ones who want to start straight away. Have you discovered a kind of key to that?
I think the first step, and it's interesting, I was having a conversation like this before we spoke, but the first step is most of those people don't even realise what character they are in that group. So they don't even have the self-awareness that they are the person that wants to row fast, or they're the person that is thinking about the line. So the first step is there, getting them to recognise themselves and what part they're playing. And then when you have the conversation, like, that specific example, you need all of those people on the boat, but they're needed at different times. And if you can, first of all, get people to recognise what part they're playing, and then facilitate a conversation so that everyone can see everyone's role and where they're needed and why and how and when, that's a first step to, it's completely, my framework is align, cohesion, communication, design and change. So alignment is, we want to get across the river in the boat. The cohesion is, okay, so this is the part that I play in getting us across the river in the boat. How are we gonna, let me understand a little bit more about your role in getting us across the river in the boat. The communication is, okay, what do we need to kind of start with and have a conversation around? Or what types of conversations do we need to have to get us across the boat? The design is, what processes are we going to use, and design and rituals and routines, and to get us across the river. And then the changes as we're going across the river, are we sure that we're on track, and what do we need to tweak and change to make sure that we go straight ahead rather than to the left?
That's why you need more than one workshop to kind of make sure that you keep checking in, right?
Yeah.
What
So
a brilliant model as well.
really nicely managed to bring in the framework of my work with into this conversation. But yeah, the cohesion piece is, for me, cohesion stuff that to be able to connect with others, you have to understand yourself. And I think a lot of us don't have that level of self-awareness, not because we are not able to, because it might be because, one, we're not even aware that that's what's needed. Secondly, we might not have the time to do it. Thirdly, might not know how to start to build that level of self-awareness in ourselves. And I think that's been partly my journey as well over the last, going back to sort of being diagnosed. That's been part of my journey as well, building that level of self-awareness. I don't think it was there before. I mean, you need some kind of, a level of self-awareness to do the kind of work that I do, but I don't think that it was there in the way that has allowed me to get to this point.
It's interesting as you're mapping out the, alignment, cohesion, communication, design, and change. I'm thinking back to the kind of different aspects of self and thinking particularly about the cohesion part, which is, well, actually, and even the alignment part, when we're having these deep inquiry sessions with people who are wanting to have the space to explore what's maybe blocking them, more in the kind of like coaching type of role. Often there's a sense about what the alignment is on, which is, I want to make change in my life towards this end. And there's sometimes some clarification that needs to be undergone to get to that point. But then the cohesion piece between the different aspects of self is fascinating. And it's so tricky because you can see, we had a conversation this morning where there's the excitement and joy gets ramped up, and then suddenly you can almost see it across someone's face and their body language when another aspect comes in of self and just kind of takes that volume back down. And then it's like, and it's like a theatre of, it's like a psycho-emotional theatre playing out in front. And so I'm really curious about how, we've been talking about your personal journey and how that plays into kind of like the professional journey, where you see the greatest insight has come as these things have unfolded together. I don't know if I'm sort of reiterating your question, but
I feel like I'm getting insights all the time. And I think this is the nature of the always figuring things out. There's been sort of one big moment, but as I say, I'm a thinker. I like to journal. I like to kind of, go on long walks and mull things over in my head. I like to sketch things out. So I guess that's part of me, is that I'm always looking for insights.
I always wonder about how people find themselves in the jobs that they're in, right? Based on their personal history and stuff, and what draws you towards or away from something, because often that'll change in midlife. Like, you might be going in a super egoic parental expectation direction, and then you have a crisis, and then you move into something that you always wanted but thought you couldn't have, all that kind of stuff. And, I think particularly in my field in psychotherapy, there's a lot of, quite frankly, fucked up shit that get people doing that job from their own fucked up history, or trying to understand themselves. It's often called a shadow profession. You get in there to almost more to understand yourself than others. But I remember sitting in the back of and I didn't put this together until many years later, but basically my mother and father and older sister, I just remember sitting in the back of the car, and they were always, the three of them were just always arguing and fighting and yelling at each other. And I was just in the back of that car quietly witnessing discord and conflict, right? And I didn't then decide, well, I'm going to be a psychotherapist, right? No, I was definitely super ego. I didn't decide to train until much later, but I realized that actually I was learning, right? I was gaining insight into how people operate badly, I guess.
Mm.
You know, I always say my family was probably like averagely dysfunctional, so like nothing terrible, but nothing great.
Yeah.
Um, do you have a story at all about, you know, why you end up being this facilitating factor amongst different groups of difference like that, and being the source of hoping to cause some kind of harmony, I guess, getting people across that river?
I mean, do you know what? I never thought about it in that way, but I know that a big driver behind what I do is, on a very simple level, I kind of I want everyone to be kind to each other. I just want everyone to I want everyone to have nice lives and good lives and feel fulfilled. And I know that a big part of that comes from how we interact with others. Like, I think, I don't know where this came from, but I do have I guess this could be a perspective from a relatively privileged view in sort of the kind of work that I do. But I do feel it's kind of unnecessary for people to, for example, go to work and have bad days because of other people.
Yeah.
Right, I think
so beautifully.
Very eloquently.
There's so many other problems for us to solve, right? That if we learn how to get on with other people and work well with other people, then we could focus on solving the big problems that we need to solve, rather than the politics and the drama that often gets in the way because of personality clashes. And that is one of my sort of big drivers behind the work that I do. I mean, I guess I don't talk about that enough, but I do kind of have this world where people go to work and they're just so energized by the work that they're doing, and sort of having, I wouldn't say great relationships, because I think relationships are challenging, but it's the ability to be able to work through those relationships and then leave work with energy so that they could put it into other things, which is whether that's, I don't know, volunteering in their community, or even like making life better for their families, or, you know, and this, I don't know, there's just certain things that I see in the world that I just think this is like just unnecessary. I mean, that's very simplistic to say it in that way.
But kindness is really underrated, isn't it? I feel like people kind of dismiss kindness, and it's so important. Kindness and gentleness and basic gratitude, people thanking each other for, you know, in the workplace, just for sending an email or completing a task, you know, just easing that kind of relational friction that you say is, there's always going to be relational friction, but people can be kinder about it.
Yeah. So I don't know where that came from. I mean, I know that my interest in collaboration came from the MA that I did. I've always wanted to work in the creative industries, or, well, when I was younger, I wanted to be a fashion designer, actually. So I always knew that I'd work in something creative. I've always wanted to work in and around kind of creative people. I don't know, I've always wanted to elevate creativity. So I honestly I don't really know. I haven't explored it. I don't know where it comes from. I mean, it could be, I mean, you know, I grew up mostly as an only child, so maybe it's a want for community. I don't know. But I mean, even though I'm kind of a big advocate of collaboration, I do love spending time on my own. So I don't know. I also don't know. So yeah.
But you sound like you have a good nose for it. Like, it sounds like you went towards what interested you along the way. You know, maybe not knowing like a clear motivation, in a sense, is actually indicative of someone who's just been kind of open to following what energizes you and what interests you, and somehow being able to develop that into something.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know where, you know, because when I think about what I'm doing now at Bracket with the sort of team culture consultancy, it has been, you know, from the very first iteration of Bracket into what it is now, it has been a real process of evolution. So I'm not quite sure where it comes from. It just happened.
So with the kind of trajectory that you've taken, because I think about sort of like the Alison question again, like that's, you know, such an Alison way to respond. I've always experienced you as someone who's very creative, with a sort of singular vision, determined, independent, and to see someone who's got these qualities that I really admire, use those qualities to bring people together. It's like being quite solitary and also having that collaborative element to it. Are there specific challenges that you found quite tricky to move through? And if the answer is yes, how did you plot a way forward for yourself?
I mean, like most of these questions, I'm just going to go with the first thing that popped into my head is, I think, working for myself and the lack of that clear path, and the lack of, I guess, for want of a better word, like a line manager or guidance, like having to do a lot of figuring out on my own. That's been a challenge. I think sort of just not knowing, like when things haven't been working out, a question that's often popped into my head is like, is it because I'm not good? And you just never know. Well, you do know to some extent, but then you don't.
You second guess yourself somehow. Or...
Exactly, second guessing. And, deep down, like, I do believe in the work that I do, and I do believe that, we deliver for our clients, and I do believe the work that I do is high quality, but then there's always that kind of, but is it?
I mean, we've spoken to a lot of people in this series, and certainly in my work as a therapist, and this, this imposter syndrome is a really big thing, and a kind of insidious, pernicious self-doubt is a really big thing. But the way you've just presented your doubt seems to me refreshingly unpathological in the sense that, like, yes, I mean, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but like, of course, in an ideal situation, one does ask themselves those questions, right? Did this not work because of something I could have done better, or what should I have learned from this, or I'm doubting my process, or I've just written this book and I'm not sure now. And it sounds like your relationship to that is really healthy to me. And maybe this is the Alison I'm seeing, or the one that's behind.
It doesn't feel healthy when I'm going through that process.
Well, that's what I wanted to find out. That's what I wanted to find out. Like whether that self-doubt is actually kind of a pernicious thing that can express itself as imposter syndrome, or whether you feel like you hold it in a kind of place that's more critical but not condemning.
I mean, I think it's part of me. I think, I even write in the book that I'm a recovering perfectionist, but I think part of me is, and it's the figuring out, always figuring out, like always wanting to be better, and taking that feedback. And I think it's a blessing and a curse. I think, like you say, it can be really healthy because that continuous improvement is, I mean, in some ways it's nourishing, and it is nice to know that you're always a work in progress and you can be getting better. At the same time, it can be, I mean, I guess it can be a little bit paralyzing as well.
What about the before and after? Because it sounds like before the illness, and I don't know if that was part of that, like kind of you're habituated to a high level of anxiety, that something shifted in, something let go.
Yeah. And I think just more the recognition that it's, I guess, I think before it wasn't something that I was particularly aware of. It just was. And I didn't see it as a, I'm trying to, I guess in the after, it's more, I can't say I can switch it on and off, but I can see it. It's like the fish in water. That's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Before I was a fish in the water. What's water? And after, I'm the fish that's swimming past the two young fish, saying, "How's the water today?" Because I can see the water. Do you know that analogy? That kind of little bird? Yeah.
That's lovely. So I'm conscious we're coming close to time, aren't we? And I'd love to ask, and this kind of weaves throughout the conversation that we've had, because you really have a lot of self-awareness and insight, but is there a life lesson that comes to mind now that you feel that you've you've come to learn quite well? And if so, I'd love to hear about it. And then what's a lesson that you think still needs more care and attention and some work?
Oh gosh, a life lesson. I think the biggest shift for me, and this is, we haven't spoken about this, but the biggest shift for me was that connection between thought and experience. So almost like the way you see the world is the way that the world is, and you've got a choice in how you see the world to some extent. Yeah, and so this connection between, thoughts, behavior, feelings, thoughts, behaviors. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but more like change the way that you think, and then you change, what's that phrase? Change the way you see things, and then the way that you see things change, or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
But just that I had more power over what was happening in my life than I thought, just by the way that I saw things and the way that I thought. If I wake up thinking I'm going to have a bad day, I'm going to have a bad day. If I wake up and think, today could be a good day, then I'm more open to experiencing and seeing good things. Also, it's not, these are some of these phrases are really trite, but they're so true, which is, it's not the way that, it's not what happens to you, but it's how you react to how things happen to you. And all of just that, I guess, the self-determination, the kind of having more control over what happens in my life, rather than thinking that, I have to kind of sit there and take what happens to me and that's just my lot. Just having a little bit more agency. I think that's probably been my biggest life lesson. And, like everybody, I fall into my old habits, and then I'll kind of try and snap myself out of it. It's like, if something's happening that I'm not happy with, and it's like, well, what am I contributing here? What can I change? There may be a sort of big aspect of it that I can't, but what can I change? That's probably been my biggest life lesson. And I think there's so much more to dig into around that, because we haven't really spoken about it. In terms of something that I'm still learning, oh gosh, well, I just feel like there's so much that I'm still learning. I don't know. I guess I think being in the position that I am, like, I think I feel really privileged that I'm in a situation where I get to see, with clients that trusts the work that we do at Bracket, I get to see so many different dynamics within relationships and working relationships, and I can learn from that as well. I have my own dynamics that I'm involved in, where, of course, I'm not a facilitator. My family, my friends, walking out on the street, and none of us are perfect human beings, but I think that we all have the opportunity to kind of reflect. I think, there was an example the other day where, and it's not a situation I'm proud of, but I was walking down the street, and I think it was a really hot day, and there was a woman sitting on the curb, sort of relatively old lady, sort of by the bus stop. And I walked past, and in my head, I kind of thought to myself, I wonder if she's okay. And I just carried on walking. And then a lady behind me went up to her and asked if she was okay. And I thought to myself, if a thought like that goes into my head, I'm not going to let that pass again. If I think I'll pass someone in the street and I'm wondering if they're okay, I'm going to ask them. I'm not going to let, so it's things like that I'm always trying to kind of, I guess, improve on. And I think we're never going to get it perfect, but where are those situations where you can, I guess, be better, interact, when I'm having conversations with my parents, my aunts, my uncles, you sometimes come out of conversations and you think, I could have done better.
Yeah.
And so, I guess that's what I'm always learning in those situations. Where are there opportunities to be better?
Continuing to grow. I hope everyone has that as lots of people don't, for sure. Like, I've done that now, I'm fixed.
Yeah.
so your book is done. It's about to come out.
Well, when is the publishing
Kind of-
date, just quickly?
It's the 21st of November.
Oh, right. So really, really
Yeah.
soon.
Yes, imminent.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Given kind of what we've been talking about today and kind of consolidating it, if you imagine, your book launch and that next step, what maybe theme would you draw on that how you might approach that next step differently based on kind of all of these lessons that you've learned across your life? If there's something you might do differently, consciously and with intention.
I think one of the things that I'm practicing a lot more is not doubting myself. Like, I think there's this thing around like playing a little bit bigger than I've played in the past, not learning to self-censor less. And I guess, I mean, it's interesting, this is called Time to Show Up, but it's like, how do I show up more? How do I be more visible as myself without worrying about how that comes across? Just being myself, I think, is, I think this is something that happens as you get older anyway, sort of becoming more comfortable with yourself. But that's something I think definitely that I'd love to step into on the launch of the book. Yeah.
I love that.
Using my voice
playing
a
it
bit
big.
more.
I like that expression too.
Yeah,
Playing it a bit more big. Yeah.
So it's actually gone really fast. We're already like over an hour in. So we're going to move to the kind of quick fire. It's quick fire. It sounds quite aggressive. Anyway, so the closing round. And I'd love to ask, how do you feel?
And these are short answers coming down from our big answers.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what makes it quick fire.
That's what makes it quick
Yeah.
fire. How are you feeling about our conversation now that we've kind of come to the tail end of it?
Good. And I feel like I wish we could go on for another hour because I just feel like there's so much, to good.
Explore.
And there's so much to explore. Yeah.
Great. And did you learn anything new about yourself in the process of the conversation today?
Yeah, I think sort of that grounding of me having experienced that change in myself and connecting that to, I guess, that self-compassion that I have for myself and connecting that to the compassion that I have for clients in how difficult change is and seeing them through that process.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
And then if you now, as Alison from today, could go back and talk to young Alison when she was 10 years old and sit and have a chat with her, what might you say to her and what do you think she might have to say to you?
Oh gosh, this is a bit emotional.
Oh.
Yeah, Alison at 10 years old, I think was struggling a little bit just with her place. So I think I would, I don't know, give her a bit of reassurance. I don't know what else. A hug, definitely a hug.
Oh, nice.
But I'd want to tell her, I'd want to tell her that sort of the fact that she's different isn't something to be ashamed of, and it's, to kind of step into being unique a bit more.
Nice. And what do you think she would say back to you, Alison? Grown up Alison.
She'll probably say, "Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Why do you look like that?" I don't know. Yeah, I guess little Alison was very curious, and yeah.
I feel like she might be quite impressed with you.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
Someone who's managed to embody that, what you're advising your younger self to have, to model that. I would hope so, anyway. Yeah. So, lots of people will be listening to this interview and drawing on life experience and professional experience. If you just had to choose one piece of advice to give listeners who are trying to find their way professionally and personally, what would that be?
That life lesson that I had is like, you have more agency than you think, and it doesn't cost anything. It really is kind of imagining, sort of recognizing the thoughts that you're having, how you're seeing the world and how you're viewing the world and how you react to things. If you kind of start there with that sort of self-awareness and that observation, then it'll probably be quite insightful.
Lovely.
Thank you. Showing up. In a way,
Thank
for
you so
yourself.
much for showing up for you and for us. And if people want to hear more, especially about your new book, which is coming out, where are the best places for people to find out your work and what you're up to?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Alison Coward. My website is bracketcreative.co.uk, and my book is called Workshop Culture: A Guide to Building Teams That Thrive. That's it.
Maybe we'll put those links in the show notes. This will probably be out around the time your book is coming out. So really, really good timing.
Yeah.
Thank you so
much.
Me.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to show up with us today. Really appreciate your candor and honesty and being here with us. Thank you.